Welcome to the basic AutoModeller Pro tutorial. My name is Leonhard Frese, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you the very basics of the software. So when you first start AutoModeller Pro, it is going to look something like this. You have the toolbar on the top that automatically starts and docks with 3ds Max by default. You can change this behavior by clicking on Max Start, which will then ask you whether you want to start AutoModeller with 3ds Max or not. You can also make the toolbar dock on the bottom instead. This setting will be remembered the next time you start 3ds Max. Now, to get started, I created a couple of objects. So what you do is you select those objects you want to use as geometry texture, and with these selected, click the Make Source button, which is this one, and then you can open the painter and start to paint anywhere in the scene. But you have to make sure that the objects you are painting on are having UV mapping set up. So this is basically a texture. This is used as a texture. So this means that you can change the tiling of the box object by changing the gizmo or any other sort of UV mapping. You can even rotate this. And you can also change the objects in the source, which is pretty cool. Also, you should know that you can dock the paint window on the right side by clicking this button, or undock it by pressing that button, and here you can also undock it again. So whenever you need the painter, you can just click here, and when you don't need it, it won't be in your way, so you can undock it. So when you're using the painter, you don't have to use the Pick Target button at all. This one. This button is only there for your convenience to quickly apply a geometry texture to an entire object. Most of the time when you are using the painter, you don't have to use that button at all. So the way this works, you can select the objects of your geometry texture and then pick a target, and it quickly applies the geometry texture to the entire target. Now you also see this gizmo object that's sort of like a bounding box. This determines which part of the geometry texture is going to end up on the target object. So when we change the width of this object, it will change the gaps. So the gizmo can be used to get rid of these gaps at the borders. Can also be used to offset the position of the geometry texture, or you can scale it. So this basically defines the part of the geometry texture that is going to end up on the target object. To quickly select the gizmo, you can select one object of the geometry texture and press Ctrl G. Then this is selected, which is useful. Now to add an object to an existing source, you simply create a new object like a cylinder, and what you do is you select one object of the existing source and also the cylinder, and then you see a little plus symbol on the source button, which allows you to add this cylinder to the source. And then you can click the regenerate button, and the new object is added to the source. So to regenerate an object, a target, you can simply select either the result or the target object itself and click on the regenerate button. So you can delete the result, and when you select the target and click regenerate, it will regenerate the object. You can also select multiple targets and regenerate them all. This is useful if you have the automatic update disabled here. If you turn this off, the automatic updating will no longer work. So if you move this around, you see when it's on, it will automatically update the last target you used. If you turn it off, this will no longer work. And in this case, whenever you change something, you can regenerate the target by clicking this button, which will then update the target. This also works when you use the painter. So when you use the painter and paint somewhere in the scene, you can then select the result and delete it, and when you regenerate the target, the painted results will be regenerated. So you can combine multiple geometry texture on a single target object. So to select a source for painting, you have to make sure that at least one object of the geometry texture you are going to paint is selected. You can either do this by clicking on this list, which will simply select the geometry texture, the containing group object, or you can simply select a single object of the geometry texture, which will do the same thing. While painting, it is easier when this is activated to simply click here to switch the sources. So when we paint this, you can simply select this here, and it will replace the objects in the way of that are in the way of the brush. Now I'm going to show you the property window for AutoModeller, which is this. So this property window will look different depending on the object you have selected. So if you have nothing selected, it will simply show a selection of tools you can use. You can read up on those tools by opening the documentation. You can do that by clicking on the question marks that are right to the different sections here. If you click this, it will bring you to the relevant page in the documentation where you can read up on the various tools. So whenever you are not sure what a specific setting does, you can simply click the question mark button and then read up on the various topics. It will show only the relevant information about the specific sections. Now to change the various settings of the source, you have to select a single object, only one object of the source to view its settings. And then, for instance, you have here the source menu, which defines whether your source was created in the front view or the top view. By default, this is set to top view, to front view. You can change this here. This only works for new sources if you create a new source. So this front view means that the object is supposed to face the front, which is useful for walls. For instance, if you have a brick wall, so by default front view is the standard option. So if you change this to facing top, it will rotate the object. For instance, this might be more useful if you're using buildings as geometry textures or something similar, or a pavement. But in this case, facing front makes more sense. So here you have the gizmo options. This selects the gizmo, and you can change it. Also, to reset the gizmo, you can click this button, which will reset the gizmo to fit to the source. You can center all pivots, and you also have a placement option, which simply defines the surface touch position, which can be inside, middle, outside, or something in between. And then you have a UV tiling modifier. You can define a UV channel that is going to be used for the target, and some tiling values. This is multiplied with the UV mapping that is applied to the target object. And the important thing are these settings, which define how the objects are being copied. You have the pure copy mode, you have the instance mode, and you have various options. For instance, in this case we can use the stairs mode, which is pretty useful if you're creating stairs. And what you can do, you can change the target objects, and then the results automatically update. You also have a curved surface setting, which allows you to deform an object to fit to a round curved surface. So if we apply this, you can see that the object is being deformed. What you see is being deformed to fit to the curvature. If this is disabled, the result will look something like this. And what is important here is that the segments roughly match the segments of the cylinder. So if you have too few segments, it won't look as good. The most important setting here is probably the border setting. By default, this is set to deform to fit, which means that the object is deformed or conformed to the borders of the target object. And this works best if you have enough segments, if you have enough polygons. If you don't have enough polygons here, you will get some gaps. So you have to make sure that you have enough subdivision in your topology to make this work properly. So the other settings are overlap, which will simply overlap at the borders. You have scale to fit, which scales the object to fit to the borders. You have deform to fit, and slice to fit, which simply slices and caps the object at the borders. So definitely the best results you will get using deform to fit. Actually, most of the time you won't have to use the property window at all, because all of the border settings you can override using the painter, and also the stairs mode. So if you paint now, we can override this for each object individually. And so sometimes this deform to fit mode won't work properly. So if any of these modes doesn't give you satisfying results, you can change it on a per object basis using the painter. So again, most of the time you won't be needing the property menu unless you're making some changes to the tiling or other default settings. But these settings, stairs mode and deform to fit, they can all be changed using the painter. So most of the time you won't be needing this property window at all. So the various tools, I'm not going to cover all of them, but for instance you have in the quick tools sections, you have tools to select all resorts, all targets, all sources, or hide, unhide them, and stuff like that. In this example, you can see the how the curved deformation is useful if you want to apply round objects to a round surface. And you see here the spacing of the polygons are not optimal, which is due to the tiling of the cylinder, to the geometry of the cylinder not being subdivided enough. So you get better results if this roughly matches the subdivision of the source objects. So it looks much cleaner now. So to get rid of the gaps, you can select one object of the source and press Ctrl G to select the gizmo, and then change the width of the gizmo to get rid of the gaps at the borders, which works nicely. One important thing I didn't mention yet, you can unmake an entire source by selecting one object and then select the property window and click on unmake. This will remove all AutoModeller data from the source and remove the gizmo object, and then you can apply changes to it or add new objects and remake the source again. You also have hide, unhide buttons here for the entire source, or select all to select all, and then you can delete it and stuff like that. There are various ways you can use the painter. By default, the brush is selected, and the UV brush size is relative to the target object's underlying UV mapping. So if you use a lot of tiling, sometimes you might need UV brush size values that are greater than 1. In this case, the UV mapping is between 0 and 1, so this will do just nicely. If you want to only paint a single object, you can make this UV brush size as small as possible, which will then can then be used to paint single objects or delete them. You can hold the Alt key to delete while painting, which is pretty useful. Also, you have different brush modes. You have the entire object fill mode that will apply the geometry texture to the entire object, or you can activate it for specific phases of the target object, or an entire UV aisle, which is pretty useful. The other options, like only borders, that paint only at the borders, and only if there is an intersection of the object placed at the borders. If there is no intersection, it will not place an object at the borders. So if you change the UV mapping, this might work differently. So you have stuff only at the borders, and here all the objects intersecting the borders are not painted. And you have the normal fill mode that fills only faces that are facing in a certain directions. And clear brush texture will remove only the selected geometry texture from the object and will leave all other textures on the object. So this is it for now. If you have any further questions regarding the use of the software, if anything is unclear or you have any issues using the software, please contact me at contact@automodeller.com. It might be a while till the next tutorial, but we will release an update to the software, fixing a few bugs and with a new example scene sometime in February. So till then, stay tuned and keep auto modeling. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.